Well, I'd like to welcome all of you to the 2012 Hosokawa Lecture Series. Before I introduce our guest speaker and lecturer, I want to acknowledge the Hosokawa family for endowing this very exciting and wonderful program, which includes a journalism contest in addition to the lecture. It is named for Robert Hosokawa, who was a 1940 graduate of Whitman College and an alumnus of Perils. After graduating with honors in English, Robert was considering law school when he and other Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps at the start of World War II. He and his wife were allowed to leave the internment camp in Idaho after one of his former Whitman professors, English professors, Tommy Howells, found him a job with a weekly newspaper in Independence, Missouri. He later reported for papers in New York, Iowa, and Minnesota, and held journalism professorships at the University of Missouri and the University of Central Florida, and has throughout his career been a mentor to many journalists. So I'm proud to announce tonight, before our lecture, the winners of this year's Hosokawa Journalism Contest. Each of the categories carries a prize of $500, and so the students who are the recipients of the award are particularly excited to receive them. As you can see from your programs, their work was judged by an international panel of professional journalists, and students who were fortunate enough to be winners, I'd like you to stand when I give you a name. So for Best Photograph, Allison Felt. Allison, please stand. Best Sports Reporting, Sylvie Lee. Best News Story, Josh Goodman. Best Opinion Piece, Rachel Alexander. And we have a tie for Best Feature Story between Shelley Lee and Rachel Alexander. So. And thank you to all the pioneer writers for the great and hard work you do on the paper. I also want to thank and acknowledge Rob Bleffen and the Union Bulletin for the sponsorship of this series, for this event, and for judging the contest. We really appreciate UB's support through this whole lecture series. Let me briefly introduce our guest. David Boardman is the executive editor and senior vice president of the Seattle Times. He has oversight and responsibility for the news department of Washington State's largest newspaper and for its website, seattletimes.com. Under his leadership, the Times won the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news presented for print and online coverage of the assassination of 4 police officers in Lakewood, Washington that year. In previous years, David directed an investigation of abuses into a federal tribal housing program, which won the 1997 Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting, and coverage of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and its aftermath, which won the 1990 Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. And he's also directed 10 other projects that were Pulitzer finalists. He's been the recipient of major national awards in journalism, including the Goldsmith Prize for investigative reporting from Harvard University, the Worth Bingham Prize for investigative reporting, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Award, and Associated Press Managing Editors Award, a Public Service Award. And he is secretary of the board of the directors of the American Society of News Editors, and will be leaving just on Monday to a conference in which President Obama and what's his name? Romney. Near Romney. Sorry about that. That was unintended, by the way, I want you. He also serves as chairman for the Center for Investigative Reporting in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and has conducted seminars for journalists there in Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, and Turkey. And he's a former member of the Sigma Delta Chi Foundation Board and has served 4 times as a juror for Pulitzer Prizes. David is a native of Ohio, was raised in a small community about 15 miles east of Cleveland, is a graduate of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University and has a graduate degree from the University of Washington, and is an inductee in the Medill Alumni Hall of Achievement and the University of Washington Communications Hall of Fame. Before joining the Seattle Times in 1983, Boardman was a reporter and editor of several papers in the Northwest and worked on a construction project in Liberia, West Africa. He has, as part of his community work in Seattle, volunteered as a youth basketball coach and served on advisory boards supporting music and journalism programs in the Seattle Public Schools. I know David in a somewhat different context, having followed firsthand a story that he administered with a team of people from the Seattle Times for over 3 years, and that the Times investigated and ultimately published. And throughout the investigation and publication of that story, I had the personal privilege of watching from afar how a professional journalist, a consummate professional, develops and tells a very difficult and complex story while relentlessly abiding to journalistic ethics, of fact-finding and fact-checking, of corroborating evidence against other evidence, and of weaving together seemingly divergent perspectives on the evidence into a tightly knitted argument. I learned that investigative journalism can be both thrilling and heartbreaking. And in all instances, it involves tedious work that requires a critical mind, clear values, and a judicious sense of right. David and his work exemplify all of these qualities, and I consider it a true honor to have him and his wife Barbara here with us tonight, and to have David as our Hosokawa Lecture. So please extend to David and Barbara Boardman a warm Whitman welcome.
First of all, thank you all for coming on this beautiful Seattle night. It really is my great honor and privilege to be here. I feel quite connected to both Whitman and to Walla Walla in a variety of ways. First, I've known George Bridges and Carrie Tupper for many years. The Whitman community is so fortunate to have a man of George's vision and character and experience at the helm, and a woman of Carrie's strength and insight and passion at his side, or as the case may be, in front of him. Secondly, my life just seems to be filled with witties. The guy who hired me, Alex McLeod, was a witty in the 1960s. My assistant, a woman named Rian Souders, without whom I would implode, is a witty, class of 98. I have several close family friends who attend here now. Gus Friedman, class of 13, Johnny Larry, class of 14, Katie Miller, class of 12, who's here tonight. Katie's here somewhere. Also, in addition to my day job, or as part of it actually, I'm an officer of your fine local newspaper, the Union Bulletin. As you may know, the Bleffen family owns the UB and the Seattle Times, and Rob Bleffen and I work closely together. Finally, though I'm by no means a heavy drinker, I do try to consume as much of your finest agricultural products, and I don't mean soft winter wheat. I'm also especially honored to be giving a lecture in the name of Robert Hosokawa. I have never had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Hosokawa, but I do feel connected to him as well. Not only did he attend the same high school as my daughters did, Garfield of Seattle, go Bulldogs. He spent most of his professional life doing what he and I both love best, working as a newspaper man. So about that day job of mine, as George mentioned, I'm the editor of the Seattle Times newspaper. These days, that also means I'm the editor of our website, seattletimes.com, our iPhone app, our Android app, our iPad app, our Kindle app, our 9 Twitter feeds, our 8 Facebook pages, our Pinterest page, something that I just recently learned about, our University of Washington football app, the University of Washington basketball app, and I will come read the paper to you at home over your breakfast cereal. Such is the life of a newspaper editor these days. Times are certainly tough. It's the most challenging time in my career, in the profession, and it's also the most exciting. There's more valuable news and information available now to consumers than ever, and more meaningless noise. There's this opportunity to connect across the fault lines of race and age and income and gender and religion and political perspective. Yet those same fault lines just seem to be getting deeper and wider. The technical tools of my trade in the form of a smartphone are now in the hands of hundreds of millions of people. Using these tools, they can, as they did in Tunisia, call their comrades to the streets via Facebook and Twitter and topple an oppressive government. They can gather thousands of signatures on internet petitions and force the Bank of America to cancel a planned debit card fee. They can elevate a single incident in Sanford, Florida to a point of national dialogue and debate about race and guns and human rights. But those same tools can and have been used to falsely spread the news of the deaths of various public figures, from civil rights activist Dorothy Height to singer Kanye West to former Vice President Dick Cheney to actor Kevin Bacon. They've been used to disseminate the so-called truth about our president and his secret dedication to Islam. They've been used by teenagers to bully and embarrass gay classmates, even leading some of those classmates to take their own lives. We're in a period that Alan Rusbridger, who's this really fascinating editor of Britain's Guardian newspaper, calls the mutualization of journalism. On this side of the Atlantic, being the less refined sports nut boors that we are, some people call it pro-am journalism, in which both professionals and amateurs are producing and distributing news and information. In many ways, this is a good thing, but not entirely. A woman named Geneva Overholzer, who's a former newspaper editor who now directs the journalism program at the Annenberg School at USC, she said, "We used to have a shortage of voice, but we had a plenitude of reporting. Now we have an abundance of voices, but a shortage of reporting." And so that wraps it up about journalism in the 21st century. It's a time of extraordinary promise and of intimidating peril. For the newspaper business in particular, you've no doubt heard plenty about our problems, and some of what you've heard is even true. Why, besides for the purpose of the fine Whitman students we honored tonight, perhaps finding jobs in journalism, and me keeping mine, and Rob keeping his, why should you care? Does the future of newspapers in particular really matter? Mine is the only industry, other than the military, that's specifically called out in the United States Constitution. Not because the founding fathers had any great affection for the press, because they certainly did not, but they knew that its freedom was essential for the survival of the democracy. Consider this quote from Thomas Jefferson: "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate for a moment to prefer the latter." Today, I might argue that the healthy press is all the more essential, more than it was those 240 years ago, given the complex and complicated world in which we live. Frankly, in the long run, and this is a really important point as we go forward here, it doesn't really matter to me whether the mode of delivery is ink on paper or electrons on your phone or your tablet or your laptop. So it's not so much a newspaper that I want to talk about, but the notion of a large professional newsroom. Skilled, trained professionals dedicated to serving their communities with quality, verified reporting that's delivered without fear of favor. In fact, I would argue that the newspaper's role as a town square of news and information has in some ways never been more important. You know, we live in this age where Americans seem to be migrating to these silos of information, echo chambers, where the things that they think they know are simply regurgitated by other people who think they know the same thing. The pundit James Carville put it this way, and I just love this, it's a twist on an old Mark Twain quote. He says, "Americans these days use the media the way a drunk uses a lamppost, for support, not illumination." You know, you can watch Fox News and their coverage of a particular event, then switch over the channel and watch MSNBC's coverage of the exact same event, and your head will be spinning. Two entirely different accounts of the same set of facts. In this balkanized world, the quality newspaper, the one that does its job right, really stands out as a community beacon. Not in the way that it has in the past. I mean, those days of the gatekeeper, of one voice to many voices, those days are over. And I think probably for the better. But the newspaper can still be the one place, the best place, where a civilized, informed conversation and exchange in a community can occur. Besides, without the large gathering force that a newspaper represents, you might not have very much news of any sort at all. A study by the Pew Research Center on the people in the press found that even with this proliferation of all these new news sources, and Twitter and Facebook and all the blogs, 90% of local news originates with so-called legacy media, and most of that starts with the printed newspaper. So all those blogs, for the most part, they are simply just riffing off of things that originally appeared in a newspaper. So the question then becomes, can newspapers and newsrooms survive? That, of course, is the question of the day for many of us. And I believe not only can we, but we must. But first, we certainly can't ignore what the challenges and bad news are. As you know, newspapers all over the country have been under tremendous siege. In this state, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which existed here since the 1850s, now has gone to an online-only publication that bears no resemblance to its former self. They've got about 10 reporters, and they specialize in pictures of girls in bikinis. The San Francisco Chronicle, circulation is probably maybe a quarter of what it was 10 years ago. The Mercury News, which was one of the finest regional newspapers in America, had a newsroom of more than 500 people. They now have 90 in their newsroom. Tucson Citizen closed. Rocky Mountain News closed. Ann Arbor News, online only. Detroit Free Press, delivered to your door just 4 days a week. You can't get it the other days. Just newsroom after newsroom devastated. Why is that? Well, this tells the story in a very stark way. This is print advertising revenue from 2003 till last year. Was growing at a slow pace and then just fell off the cliff. The bottom line, the one in red, is print revenue. This is the online revenue that newspapers are gathering. It's growing very, very slowly and has become a bigger part of that bar, but as you can see, there's a very long way to go to make that up. Here's another way to slice the decline in print ad revenue. This line is retail advertising. This line is classified advertising, which is really the biggest driver of the loss, and then national advertising. Why? Where did all this go? Well, this is one of the major places it went, certainly. Craigslist. In any major metropolitan area, this has become the source of the place to go to buy cars, houses, to find a job. And there are, as you can see, in places, in cities all over the world now, this is a big driver. Shame on the newspaper industry for not disrupting itself before this appeared. We should have recognized that, in fact, the internet was a far better way to search for things and to be connected and to connect buyers and sellers. Although it would have been pretty hard to beat the original price point on this, which was 0. But classified ads traditionally made up as much as 50% of the metropolitan newspaper's revenue, and that's almost all gone now. Here's another place it's gone, and this is an aspect that most people are not aware of. They think it all went to the internet. A lot of the advertising revenue went to direct mail, the junk mail that you get on your doorstep every day for a variety of things. And the most painful part about this loss is that direct mail is heavily subsidized by the federal government in the form of the post office. No private business could deliver that at the price that those advertisers are getting. So up against that, as the last decade came to a close, we were in a joint operating agreement with the Hearthstone newspaper, the Seattle PI. We're a family-owned newspaper owned by the Leffens for 116 years now, and Hearthstone, the PI, along with many other large properties, including about half of ESPN, Oprah magazine, lots of magazines. One of the frustrating things for me as the editor of the Times was I constantly had to hear about the poor little PI, and I would point to Oprah magazine and say, hey, they own that too. We were in a fight to the death with them, and it really looked like we might die or we both might die. And Time magazine published this story that Seattle could become the first major U.S. city without a newspaper. Fortunately, we beat that prediction, and we're ready to meet the challenges that we have ahead. The good news, there are many aspects of good news. I'll start with this. We have this great committed local ownership, people for whom they say we make money to publish a newspaper, not the other way around, and I can give you dozens of examples of how that in fact holds true. Most newspapers are owned by public companies whose ultimate responsibility is returned to shareholders. We're not. Secondly, fortunately, we put an end to this joint operating agreement, this partnership we had with the Seattle PI, and none too soon. 2 years ago, we were the 8th biggest newspaper on the West Coast in circulation, and now we're the 2nd biggest. And this isn't because we're growing in leaps and bounds, but again, it reflects the commitment that our ownership has to our readership and the lack of commitment that a lot of these other companies have, this is good news. This is good news, this is the money we make from circulation. Even though our circulation has declined slightly, we've raised the price of the newspaper about 40%, and our loyal readers have stayed with it. It still, I would say, is an incredible bargain, and it still costs you far less than a cup of coffee. But we had trained readers to this notion that they should get the newspaper for next to nothing, and that worked as part of our business model for many years, just subsidizing the circulation so that advertisers could afford it. We're changing now to more of a consumer pay model in print, and we may ultimately do that online as well. Our online strength is really encouraging. This, probably more than anything else, is the foundation of my optimism. The numbers that we get from SeattleTimes.com are really quite awesome. We're the #1 news source for Western Washington adults, outpacing every other media online. The numbers are truly mind-blowing. As I said, 7 million people a month, or 7 million computers is the actual accurate description, unique visitors, and 62 million page views. And as I said, one of the things that's also very encouraging to me, and I talked with some of the students about this today, even in the younger demographic groups, so 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 2/3 of the adults in our area read Seattle Times content. Now, they're not getting the daily newspaper delivered to their dorm rooms or to their apartments, but they are looking at us on the web, on their phone, on their tablet, and many of them are looking at us in the Sunday printed paper, which is quite encouraging. This just came out last week in Forbes, and I found this to be really uplifting and encouraging. Forbes did an analysis, and the methodology would not pass Whitman research standards, believe me. but I can't help but share it because it's very exciting to me. So they went in every state and they looked at through the process of analyzing online links. They looked at which news sources were most read and shared at above average levels by the people in that state. So in these states that are brown, it was dark brown, it was Fox News. Many states were USA Today, New York Times up here. Oregon was NPR. Well, in Washington State, it was the Seattle Times. And in fact, we're the only truly local newspaper that had that standing in its own state, which I thought was pretty cool. So we have a good, strong foundation, but there are these tremendous challenges ahead that are both financial and journalistic, as you see here. The way we do journalism and the way we do business is changing faster than it ever has. As we forge ahead, the mantra that we say a lot in our newsroom is a very simple one, which is what we need to deliver to people is news you can't get anywhere else. Unique, enterprising content that is not a commodity that they can get anywhere. News you can't get anywhere else, when, where, and how you want it, because that's certainly what people expect. Specifically, we're striving for these goals: more unique, impactful reporting, a true multi-platform newsroom where the content is really better edited and designed across platforms, more and better community engagement, the idea that the community now wants and needs to be part of this whole process. We've got to find ways to reinvent the business side and grow some revenue, and then to make this fun again, because for a lot of people it's been more scary than fun for a while. To accomplish those, one of the things we did was we looked at the structure of our newsroom. Most newsrooms, and ours until last year, was structured this way. We had a print operation and we had a web operation. And the print operation did really most of the real journalism, and then we sort of threw the copy over the fence and posted it online a couple times a day. Well, that doesn't work for today's world. So we've reorganized in ways that we think really will help propel us into a successful future. We divided the staff into three orbs here. One is creation, one is curation, and this is a group that's focused on community. I'll talk a little about each of these. So the creation group really focuses on reporting, investigation, verification, writing, photography, video, and graphics. These are the people who are actually charged with creating that unique content that people can't get anywhere else. The curation group is operating to present that information in the most powerful way. A lot of people in my job around the country talk about wanting to be platform agnostic. We reject that entirely. We want to be platform orthodox. We want to be platform perfect. We want to give you on your phone what you're looking for on your phone, which is not to read a 10-part investigation of 100-inch stories. But you might like that on your tablet, where you can sit back at night and watch a video and have a slideshow and really have the depth. So these people are charged with that. The editing, design, the organization of material, making sense of things, upholding standards, and really prioritizing the news. The final group, and this is something I'm really excited about, we have people who are really focused on the notion of community. Again, as I said, the old model was a gatekeeper of one to many. Today's world is much more complex than that. Readers want and expect to engage with the news, whether it's just leaving a comment or whether it's a community meeting where ideas are exchanged. One of the things we've started is a community chair where we actually bring people from the community, a variety of aspects of the community, from the Seattle Storm to Occupy Seattle to various business groups, education groups. We bring them into our news meeting and we have them participate and feed back to us what's working, what's not working, what stories are we missing, how do you consume news? And it's really helping us all around the notion of engagement and really having people feel like this is a town square. This is more than just yet another news source where I can get the same information I get everywhere, but this is an important part of our community going forward. So it really is this notion of news as a conversation. There are other ways that this manifests. We've got a lot of blogs on our website that range from All You Can Eat, which is one of our former restaurant critics who just talks about food and the role that food plays in our culture and places to eat and memories of great dishes and the whole range of the ways food interplays with culture and our society. Sports blogs are enormous. Sports fans don't want to just watch and read. They want to be able to give their own running commentary on what the manager should have done and why Sean Fagan should have been traded, which is what I believe. Technology. We have live chats all the time with experts in a variety of fields. This one actually was a chat with our reporter who covers banks and the economy. It was on the mortgage side. We have areas of the website where we let people just talk among themselves with a little adult supervision. Video is, again, it's a new expectation of newspapers that we never had to deal with before. One of the things I'm really proud of and excited about is we've created a network of local blogs. We began 2 years ago with 5, and now we're up to nearly 50. Most of these are geographic, but some are communities of interest, such as a boating blog and a beer blog. In a wired community like Seattle, and I'm sure even here, these things are emerging organically. People are aggregating in their neighborhoods and in communities of interest to share information that's very specialized. This is coverage we never even did before. But what we've done is open our web pages, open our town square to these people. We don't co-opt their content. We just provide links and we send the traffic to them, so it helps sustain them. It's good for their business, but we think it's very good for ours too. And this is a map we have. You can see the neighborhoods that we have included to this point, and it's growing almost daily. And this is all on the notion that, hey, if we alert people to the best of news and information in their neighborhoods, they'll come back to us. And of course, we're heavily engaged, as I mentioned earlier, with social media. We have several Seattle Times Facebook and Twitter pages, and most of our reporters use both venues to report and distribute news. Even I regularly tweet, and I'm up to more than 2,000 followers. I tweeted today how delightful it was to meet the editors of Whitman Pioneer and how engaged and inspired I was in meeting with them. So there's some of our pages. We're also paying a lot more attention to what readers are paying attention to. In the middle of our newsroom, we have this screen in which we track which stories and blogs are getting the most attention in any 15-second period. We use this not only to see what's resonating with readers, but to alert us when there's something that we think is really important and it's not resonating with them. That tells us we've got to do something to make it more appealing. So back to where we started. Why should you care about the Seattle Times or the Union Bulletin or the East Oregonian? And why should you care if we survive? Well, because in the case of good newspapers, these are institutions that are really committed to serving the public good. Not long ago, I stumbled upon this, a Seattle Times from 1920, and this statement was printed on the editorial page. This was the mission statement. I'll just allow you to read it rather than reading out loud. But it's a mission that in many ways could serve us today. And the only part that I questioned at all was where it said, our region favored above all others in climate. They were a little looser with the facts back then. Here's today's mission. A little more modern, a little less lofty, but I think no less ambitious. Fundamental mission is to serve the community through quality independent journalism. We're committed to being the most read, most influential, most indispensable, most trusted source of news and information in Washington State. We're our region's watchdog, storyteller, and its town square, delivering useful, relevant information when, where, and how our readers can best use it. So we try to make that mission work again in all of these venues. We're going to soon begin what we call a digital subscription. So if you're a print subscriber, you will have access to all of our digital offerings for free. You'll have one that's specially designed for your tablet, specially designed for your phone, and you'll get everything we offer with a Sunday subscription. If you're not, you'll have the option to buy just a digital subscription, which is a new thing, because up to now you've gotten it for free. But again, the notion is, this costs money to do, and if you want to keep it alive, you've got to support it. I'm going to share with you a short video that demonstrates how all of this change and all these tools in our newsroom is manifesting in meaningful public service journalism. And this was a story George referred to earlier that won the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news. I think I have. You want to hit those lights? Thanks.
And I saw the AP alert indicating that 4 officers had been shot. That was the only news they had.
And the newsroom was close to full already. And what I recall was that everybody was simply bearing down.
I just called a lot of different reporters and answered the phone because a lot of people were calling to say, can I come in and help?
I look at my phone and I see the breaking news. I saw what happened. Immediately dial into the newsroom, figure out what's going on. We create a hashtag, watch shooting hashtag. There hadn't been one created yet, and people immediately started using it, and it was going gangbusters.
And there was so much information coming in that I simply couldn't keep up. The shared file just kept growing. I would write 2 paragraphs. I would check back on the shared file, and there would be 2 or 3 more listings.
There was not even a moment in between because I would send a web and publish, and then a reporter would call, and I would take the dictation, I would grab it, put it back on the file, edit it, send it, and publish again.
Jennifer Sullivan had gotten the suspect's name early on. My guess is that we probably had at least a 4 or 5 hour jump on every other news organization. And within that time, we were able to build a really compelling profile of Maurice Clemens, not only who he was, but how he came to be.
I apologize. We tested this out beforehand. Here comes my rest. This is the peril of technology. Oh, I hate that sound. While he's doing that, a little more stage setting.
Of all 4 of the officers in a pretty short order, they, obviously their deaths resonated well beyond the law enforcement community. They all had families, and we were able, I believe, to accurately portray what the effect was, what the impact was on their families.
We kept transmitting images to try to keep photos updated online. And also, that evening, we shot video. One gentleman who I heard secondhand had helped the baristas from Fourth Coffee. We were able to find him. I was able to do a quick interview.
All of a sudden, he pulls up this coat.
Reporters were on the front lines of every piece of the story, and a big piece of the story on Sunday and Monday was the manhunt. And Cliff Despo, one of our photographers, was right there in the front lines, and he found his way onto a balcony so that he could watch police surround a neighboring home. We thought, well, let's get Cliff to tweet. And sometime in the middle of the night, we got a phone call from the Seattle police. They were very nice. They said, could you hold that guy back a little bit? And it occurred to us that he might signal to a suspect or somebody helping the suspect what was going on. So he slowed down his tweets.
On Monday, it just kind of hit me. We'll just use Google Wave. We'll just try it. It kind of got bogged down when we had close to 500 people on the actual Wave, but it was like email, chat room, wiki, but with rich media capabilities, so you can collaborate on a map together in real time. Dippity is just one of those tools where you can organize things and in a timeline format, video, photo, text, and it creates some kind of chronological narrative, which was useful here because we're talking about a 40-hour manhunt and people want to know as things are changing.
It was essentially a cat and mouse game, whereas the police were chasing the suspect, we were chasing the police to see whether the suspect had been caught. I believe I left here Monday night at about 11. The game plan was that we had somebody reporter stay overnight, Mark Rodder, to listen to the scanners and check in and alert an editor when and if they found Mr. Clemens. But my wife tells the story that the phone rang at 3, I woke up groggily, grabbed the phone, and before I could say anything, my wife heard from the other side of the room, Jennifer saying, "They got him, they got him."
Fired several rounds. Took the person into custody. The Seattle Fire Department responded immediately, and all indications are that he is deceased. That's all we have right now.
In the end, the reason we were able to do as well as we did on this story was because of this ethic of serving our community through quality journalism, being accurate, being sensitive, and thinking about our community. And without those tools, without that journalistic integrity, this story wouldn't have been told the way it was told.
You could not have a conversation with Mark and not realize that his family came first. Now, Mark's been taken from us, and we are without the person so many of us relied on. We are left to always remember the man he was, follow the example he set, cherish the family and friends left behind, and I know, no matter where I am, in my career, for years to come, I will always look for Mark's nod of approval from the back of the room.
I was proud of our team and how we worked together and how the photography, multimedia, the web, and print, we did our jobs, but I think we broke some new ground.
So again, this was investigative reporting on the run, married all these best traditions of journalism: speed, challenging authority, getting it right, sensitivity to the needs of the community, great investigative reporting, great writing, great photography, great design, with these new cutting-edge tools that allow us to do all of that, all the better, and to take from the community and to get back to the community. Now I'm going to share a few of the other investigations and public service pieces that we've done over the past couple of decades that I've been at the Seattle Times. And I've chosen mostly stories that I've had a personal hand in so that I can speak with authority about them. And I think what you'll see is that each illustrates something important about these values that I call newspaper journalism and why our communities should care about whether this sort of journalism survives. And although each of these stories is different, you'll notice one constant. Each of these really made a difference. That's not by coincidence. Because we have, every day we have literally thousands of stories that we could pursue. We really try to put everything through the prism of this simple question: what good will it do? What good does it do? We only have limited resources. How can we spend them in a way that will have the greatest impact? This was a story that actually began with my wife. She was teaching English in community college at North Seattle Community College. She's a former journalist and my best editor. And one of her students came to her and said she wasn't going to be able to attend class the next day because she was going to court to deal with a case that involved a very tragic death of her young elementary school daughter. The girl had gotten out of her school bus, walked in front of the bus as she was supposed to, and the bus driver drove right over her and killed her. As this woman and her attorney began to look into that case, they discovered that the driver had a drunk driving record, and that made her, and it certainly made my former journalist wife, wonder how could that be? How could a guy with a DUI conviction be driving a school bus? So Mark urged me to look into that and invited this woman to speak to us, assuring her that we would respect her privacy and concerns. And we did. We put a team of reporters on this. We had to fight the bus drivers union. We had to fight the Seattle School District to get personnel records. Took many, many months and lots of dollars. Ultimately, we were able to produce this story that revealed that 1 out of every 9 Seattle public school bus drivers had a serious driving or criminal record. 1 out of every 9, ranging from DUIs to assault, robbery, various sexual assaults, really outrageous stuff. What good did this story do? Directly, it led to a new state law requiring that all school bus drivers be screened now for criminal records and driving records before they can get a school bus driving license. Tremendous difference in result. This story, you all, those of you who are old enough remember, and those of you who aren't certainly have heard of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which before Katrina was the largest environmental disaster in our history. 1989, 11 million gallons spilled out of the Exxon Valdez, an oil tanker, off of the coast of Alaska as it crashed into a reef. As it turns out, the captain of the ship was a heavy drinker, got drunk, went below, and left the ship in the hands of an inexperienced person who drove it into this reef. Tremendous environmental disaster. Our community, we don't cover Alaska routinely, but our community had a great interest in this story for a variety of reasons. One, the Alaskan fishing fleet is headquartered in Seattle. It's a major economic driver for many people in our city. Tremendous environmental interest in Seattle, as there is here, I know. So there's a lot of interest in it that way. And probably most significantly, we have a body of water in Puget Sound that is very much like Prince William Sound, and we have oil tanker traffic. So every news media outlet, every major one in America was converging on Valdez, Alaska, and the Seattle Times wasn't going to add a lot to covering the day-to-day story of this drunken sailor. But we asked ourselves, all right, what can we do to serve our readers and our readership and our community? And the question we came upon was, okay, what are the conditions in place that could allow one drunken sailor to cause the biggest environmental disaster in American history? There must be some fundamental problems here. We spent months and months investigating the oil tanker industry. Found many interesting facts, but one of the most fascinating to me was that almost every other Western country at that time required 2 layers of hulls on the ships that transported oil. So you had the primary hull that held the oil, then you had about a 5 or 6 foot space of air and another hull. So that way if it crashed into a reef, the airspace would simply take on the ballast and your ship would stay afloat and the oil would stay safe, but not in the United States. What good did this series do? As a direct result of this series, Washington State Senator Slade Gordon introduced and ultimately got passed legislation that required double hulls on American oil tankers. At about the same time this story emerged, we got a tip that there was a young woman who was working for another Washington State congressman at the time, and that this young woman had spoken to a reporter from a magazine called The Washingtonian, which is a local city magazine in Washington. And that this young woman was about to go public with a story of how our United States Senator Brock Adams, who many of you will remember, Democratic senator from the state of Washington, very ostensibly a gentle and kind man who had been a champion of women's rights. The Senator Brock Adams had drugged and molested her, sexually molested her. We heard about this, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer heard about it. We were an afternoon newspaper at the time. They were a morning paper. We were still deliberating what we were going to do with the story. And that morning, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer published the story that this other story was going to be published and sort of the basics of this young woman's allegations. That morning, after the PI published their story, Brock Adams held a press conference and proceeded to talk about how this young woman was making all this up. The woman alleged that he had invited, that she said, and he did not deny this, that she was a longtime family friend, that she alleged that he had invited her to his home in Washington, D.C., had poured her a mysterious drink that had a mysterious pink liquid in the drink, that she had passed out, and that he had sexually molested her. He said that this woman was lying, that she was blackmailing him, and this was all made up. Now you have to transport yourself back to 1989. It was a much different time in America as far as these sorts of incidents went. It was the norm at that time that the accuser, that the woman, was ridiculed, shamed, and very rarely taken seriously. And I regret at this point to say that that was initially the case with this young woman. We published his press conference. We summarized the facts in the Washingtonian story. And frankly, most journalists, and I'd have to include myself in that, thought that this probably was not true. I had been a local reporter and editor, and knowing what we knew about Brock Adams, it seemed to defy belief. Adams' people behind the scenes were denigrating this woman and raising the typical sorts of questions and rumors about her history. It was really typical and shameful. The very next day, I got a call from a woman who had been a source of mine saying, would you meet me at Dante's tonight? Dante's is this dive bar in the University District in Seattle with peanut shells on the floor. I said, sure. And I and a former Whitman, a Whitman graduate named Eric Prime, went to meet this other young woman. This woman, too, worked in Washington State Democratic politics. She had a deep family history in Washington State Democratic politics and was terrified about any sort of public exposure. But for the next 2 hours, in tears, proceeded to tell us that almost to a T, the exact same thing that this other young woman had described with Brock Adams had happened to her 2 weeks previous to that. And right down to the pink liquid and waking up in his bed. Then she said, you can't report a word of this to anybody, but I want you to know it so that you continue to pursue the story. Pursue we did for 3.5 years. We talked to virtually every woman who we could contact who had worked for Brock Adams. Ultimately, we found 12 cases of various seriousness, various levels of outrage, but all ranging from very aggressive harassment to rape. of women who had had experiences with him. But again, the times being what they were, every one of these women was terrified to come out publicly. Only that initial woman had had the courage to do that. All the rest of these women, and I don't denigrate them at all, and I understand completely why they felt the way they did, but they were unwilling to come out by name. I was an editor rising up the ranks at that point, and my feeling was, how can we accuse a United States Senator of this without having him face his accusers? He has to know who these women were. So we just continued to pursue. We checked out every fact we could, and we tried to get these women to come forward. Finally, 1992 dawned, and Brock Adams was beginning his campaign for re-election. At that point, I came home one night and said to my wife, I cannot, as the father of two daughters, I cannot let this man run for re-election without the voters knowing the truth about it. So we resolved we'd try one more time we'd try to persuade these women there was safety in numbers, that they should come out and tell their stories. We anticipated that they wouldn't, so we had a plan B, which was this. We would have them give us every level of detail that they could. We would triple check those details. So if a woman said, I met Brock Adams at Joe's Bar and Grill in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, and we had Mai Tais on December 28th, we made sure that she could corroborate she was there, she was in Washington December 28th, that his calendar showed he was in Washington December 28th, that Joe's Bar and Grill was open that night, and that they served Mai Tais. Everything we could check out in terms of corroboration. In fact, we did. Then we would present these women with an affidavit that would allow them, that said, we would protect them. We would not publish their names. They would allow us to publish a high level of detail about their stories. They would attest to the truth of their stories, and then most importantly, this contingency, that if Brock Adams were to sue us, they would come to court openly in our behalf. Now, this was important somewhat for the legal protection, but far more it was important for the credibility of the story. Because we knew if we could tell readers that, yes, we're not telling you the names of these women, but all Brock Adams has to do is take us to court, and these women will come forward. We knew that would really help the level of believability. 8 of the dozen women agreed to tell their story. We published this story on March 1st, 1992. I'll never forget that day because I was in the backyard playing with my kids, who at the time were 3 and 5, and my wife says, Dave, you better come see this. And there was one of the Sunday morning shows this week with David Brinkley, and it had Cokie Roberts and Tom Wicker from the New York Times and Sam Donaldson. And they were saying this was the worst piece of journalism they'd ever seen. And in fact, this was before you could just call up a newspaper on the web. All they had seen, we had 4 blank pages of detail in this story. We had a woman who had been his personal secretary for 10 years and identified as such in the story. I mean, there was great, believable detail in this. Probably 400 inches of copy, and they had seen a little 4-inch Associated Press rewrite that said that the Seattle Times and 8 anonymous women had accused Brock Adams of this. So I just saw my whole career go right there before my eyes on the little 12-inch screen TV. Fortunately, about 2 hours later, on that same television, Brock Adams held a press conference and dropped out of the race for re-election. He still asserted this was all lies, but we knew by his demeanor and by what transpired after that was the end of his political career. For the next couple of days, there was a lot of debate, and then ultimately the New York Times, a woman named Anna Quinlan, who some of you may remember, a great columnist and now novelist, she wrote a column that said the right call, and she said these women were not named, but they were not anonymous, and proceeded to talk about how right this was, what we had done. The young woman, of course, after enduring hell for those 3.5 years, the original young woman who had the courage to come out was, of course, feeling quite vindicated at that point, and went on to many, many great things, including being the wife of your president, Carrie Tupper. And I want this story never would have happened without her incredible courage, so it's my privilege to relate it to you. That story, as I said, not only led to Brock Adams' withdrawal, but it really helped change the whole national dialogue on this sort of misconduct. And as a direct result of our story, the Washington Post broke the story on Bob Packworth and his inappropriate behavior, and the reporter who wrote that told us that the trail of our story led directly to that story. And then since then, obviously now, the environment's much different when we use powerful men of this sort of work. Quickly, a couple others. Story mentioned earlier, in this particular story, we got a tip that there was a large house being built on the Tulalip Reservation, which is north of Seattle, a place that was a very, very poor reservation, pre-casino. People were living in cardboard boxes and shanties, and yet this 5,300 square foot home was being built up there, and we should check it out. The rumor says that this home was being built for the couple of tribal officials who were getting federal money. Well, as it turned out, the tip was exactly true, and we had to go up into a helicopter to actually see the house because we weren't allowed into that area of the reservation. These tribal officials were in charge of the federal tribal housing aid program, and money that was intended for the poorest Native Americans was going into their hands entirely legally because of the sovereign nation status. They were allowed to distribute it any way they chose to. They chose to build themselves a nice house with it, which is what they did. When we discovered that, we said, boy, we should probably look beyond Washington State. We looked in Oregon, we looked around the Northwest. Ultimately, we found more than 24 such cases. And this led to major reforms of that program, and actually wound up with one guy going to jail. Quickly, because I do want to leave time for questions, we're following up on 4 near accidents in Boeing 737, the most widely used airplane in the world. Cases where the pilots mysteriously were just losing control of the airplane and the plane went into a dive. In every case, Boeing asserted that it was pilot error. In 2 cases, they asserted that the pilots were trying to commit suicide. We investigated this story with great help from mechanics and engineers at Boeing, and ultimately found that there was a major design flaw in the tail mechanism of the Boeing 737. The day after this story was published, Boeing announced it was changing the design of the airplane, but that the Seattle Times story had nothing to do with it. Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, any of you from Western Washington know, well, even from Eastern Washington, I'm sure you know its reputation. It's one of the great medical centers in the world. It's a place where bone marrow transplants were invented. They've saved tens of thousands of lives. But as is often the case with powerful institutions, they ultimately were overtaken by some hubris there and sort of lost touch with some of the ethical standards around how patients were handled. And what we discovered that there were many patients being put into clinical trials there, highly experimental, highly risky clinical trials without getting full disclosure of the risks. And in fact, in some of those cases, the Hutch had a particular financial interest with pharmaceutical companies in some of these high-risk experiments. As a direct result of that story, the Hutch changed its policies and now has some of the most stringent conflict of interest laws in the country. I'll skip over most of these. Just a couple of quick things. It's not all investigative reporting. Wanted to share this, that we were the very first newspaper in the country to publish pictures of flag draped coffins returning from the Iraq War. You know, this is an aspect of the war that the Bush administration in particular did not want people to see, and the Pentagon had a rule against photographing. We got this picture from an employee of a contractor who wasn't against the war. She wanted to show mothers how respectfully their fallen soldiers were handled. We published a story to great outrage from the Pentagon and from Fox News, but it really provided an outlet for a lot of meaningful discussion on the war. We discovered that throughout Washington State, and particularly in King County, civil and criminal cases were being hidden from the public, illegally sealed. We filed 40 lawsuits to open up cases. We won 37 of them, and it really changed the dynamic in that occasion. This one is one that I'm particularly proud of. We had a big snow and ice storm in western Washington a few years ago, in 2006, and one night a family of 6 Vietnamese immigrants who were not used to the cold brought their charcoal grill into their home, very nice Bellevue home, and the family all perished. I was absolutely haunted by that, and we decided that we would find which are the most commonly used foreign languages in our county, and we gave up the whole top of our front page that day to giving people a warning not to do this. Now we know these people don't normally read the Seattle Times, but we thought if somebody saw this in Cambodian or in Swahili or whatever the language might be, that if they saw it when they went in to buy cigarettes in the 7-Eleven or in the newspaper box, that we might save some lives. And we were assured by the county health department that in fact they were positive that it did. Last one I just want to share because it's very new. At the end of last year, we published a series about how the state was promoting methadone as a painkiller for people in the Medicaid program. So the poorest people in our state were routinely getting methadone. We did an analysis and discovered that 2,100 people in 8 years had died of unnecessary overdoses from this very dangerous drug, and there were much safer alternatives. The week after we published the story, the state reversed its position and no longer does that. So to wrap up here, these are all stories that without a modern, skilled, trained set of journalists, I simply believe they would not happen. This reflects the promise of journalism, in the past and in the future. The environment we're in today, I think, helps undermine this kind of public service journalism. These stories take time. They take vision. They take courage. They take expertise, and most of all, they take resources. So will all of that still be available? I think that's the peril of journalism. And we've all heard the adage that we get the government we deserve. I would suggest to you that we get the journalism that we deserve as well. And as you go forward as consumers of news, and as you're offered things like digital subscriptions or the opportunity to help pay for content, I would ask that you keep that in mind as you make your decisions, so that we can continue to serve our community. Thank you. I took a whole lot longer than the whole group I was going to do. I apologize for that. I didn't realize how long it would take. So if you're interested in sticking around, I certainly am very willing to do so. And any questions, comments, happy to take them. Yes?
Well, I was just wondering, with the expansion of the ways of delivering the news now, do you have your newsroom divided into people who are overseeing the blogs? I mean, I understand you're the final word, but and people who are doing the online things. And also, if that is the case, do they come with it's been a long time since I was in journalism. Do they come with degrees that are in a specialty field, or are the schools teaching the whole spectrum?
Yeah, great question. We're trying increasingly to integrate the newsroom so that people aren't segregated by platform. But in terms of the training, what I'm looking for more than, I don't particularly care. I mean, a journalism degree is a nice thing if people come in with it in terms of understanding the way we think and how to use the tools and what the ethics and so on are. But what I care about most, I'm looking for somebody who has a high degree of curiosity and a real sense of mission and purpose. Expertise is nice. If somebody, when high school students tell me they want to get into the business, what I often recommend to them is go get a great degree at a small liberal arts school like Whitman in economics or history, or learn how to think, and then maybe go to one of these great graduate programs at a place like Northwestern or Columbia or Berkeley or USC and learn the tools of our trade.
What were the 40 sealed cases about?
They ranged from, there were medical devices that were killing people, and the medical Medtronic in this case had moved to have the case sealed. There were several cases that involved University of Washington football players who had been involved in criminal activity, and there was a lawyer who handled every football player's case and routinely got them sealed by friendly judges who were Husky fans. One result of that is it resulted in a series in which we had we wrote about the 2001 Rose Bowl in a series we called Victory in Ruins. And Husky football is like a religion. It was a very dangerous thing for us to do, but we did it. And the lead of one of our stories said that when the Huskies took the field that year to play the University of Idaho in the opening game, of the 22 players who took the field, 16 had warrants for their arrest. And the cops didn't know where they were. Yeah.
In the Clemens story, where you have all this action happening right away, and you have like 500 people on and on, how do you sort it out? What's true, what's not true?
Great, that's a great question. And in fact, I talked earlier about how I tweet now. I had a Twitter account for a year before that thing happened, and I think I had 6 followers, and I had maybe tweeted 3 times about what I had for breakfast or something, just trying to play with it. Well, that Monday morning I came in and I said to our staff, what can I do to help? And at 5 o'clock in the morning I said, well, why don't you handle the Twitter? All right, how do I do that? And over the course of the day, I realized there was exactly what you're saying, this river of information and misinformation. There's this manhunt for this police killer going on. And everybody, oh, he's spotted over here. No, he's over here. He's over here. And all this disinformation. And what I did is I just took 2 of my very best reporters, and as it all came in, I said, check this out, check that out, check this out. And then broadcasted it back out in terms of this isn't true, this is true. And by the end of the day, I think I had about 1,000 followers, and everything was being retweeted. And it helped me understand the power of some of these social media, and you can use it both to gather information and to verify. But it also helped me really see the difference between amateur journalists and professional journalists who know how to verify information.
We get up at 5:30, we read the Seattle Times on one handle, the New York Times on the other handle. And I'm curious, who are your digital subscribers? Are they people in the Pacific Northwest? Are they across the United States? Who's the digital
The subscribers, and right now the digital subscribing pool is very small because it's really the only way you can digitally subscribe is through Kindle or a small offering that we have. Now soon it will be much more expansive within about 6 weeks, I think. But yeah, right now they tend to be people around the Northwest who can't get daily delivery readily, or expatriates, people who have moved across the country and are interested in reading it every day. Now, our digital traffic, so those 7 million a month, that really comes from all over the world. Our traffic tends to aggregate into its camel shape. So one of the peaks are people who are what we call flybys or drive-bys, and they're coming to us usually from a Google search for Boeing or Microsoft or the Seahawks, and they may see us 5 times a month. Then we have the people who see us 5 times a day, and those are mostly local people who are checking all day long. So if we do a paywall at some point, if we set that meter just right, the flybys will never see it, and we'll continue to get their traffic and be able to sell advertising. And then the loyal people, they'll see it on the first day, but they'll be sure, I'll pay. So we're hoping. Yes?
Journalists in general and scientific journalists in particular seem to be becoming an endangered species. And I was wondering if you see any hope for a turnaround in that over the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really optimistic about the long term of journalism as we reinvent this business model because, yeah, it's true now that many big papers especially are really struggling because of the loss of the advertising, but the cost of printing and delivering a newspaper is very expensive too. So once we reinvent the model, I think when you talk about science journalism in particular, journalists who have an area of expertise, I think are going to be more highly valued than ever. Because again, there will be this divide between news that's just commodity, that's floating around the air and anybody can get, and unique value added journalism. And I think science journalism has a fabulous future. Yeah.
To just add a little bit to Sue's comment, I've heard it said that everybody can have their own opinion, but everybody cannot have their own set of facts.
I like that.
There was a whole Doonesbury series of cartoons on that with telemarketers telling people their own set of facts. And I wonder if with journalism, if your paper, I mean, the trouble is that, of course, facts can be interpreted differently. And you said that you had gotten away from kind of single point of view in the paper to a more diverse point of view. But how do you kind of keep it together in terms of keeping it truthful and factual? And how do you convey to people facts that they perhaps don't want to?
Yeah, I mean, that's
like global warming.
Yeah, it's really the challenge. And some of the global warming is a great example. In the old, I'm sorry, the question was how do we separate how do we separate opinion from fact, and how do we persuade people who might not want to know a particular set of facts that in fact it's fact. So for instance, global warming is often an example. And in the old journalism, we would have said, oh, we need to give equal weight to the people who say global warming is caused by man and the people who say either there is no global warming or it's just a natural cycle. Well, when you've got 99% of the established scientists on one side, you don't have to give equal weight to this side, is the way we approach it now. You still have to acknowledge that there is this movement out there and there are some questions, but equal is not smart. What else? Yes?
One of the things I was really struck by in the video account of how you pulled off the 2010 Pulitzer story was how well the team at the time was able to integrate all of the facts that were coming into a really tight multimedia package. And it seems like, I'm not a reader of the Times, unfortunately, it seems like you guys have a really solid backend and infrastructure for handling these sorts of multimedia stories and stories that need multiple different dimensions of coverage in order to really be effectively told, especially in web form. How can papers that aren't necessarily some of the largest in the region, how can more local papers use the same sort of techniques to get similar results when they don't have the same budget or the same amount of human resources to get that sort of thing done?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, and there is no simple answer to it, although increasingly the technology that's needed for some of these things is getting less and less expensive. And I know the Union Bulletin is right on the verge of new content management systems for the web that are going to give them more flexibility and more resources. I know they're really focused on how can we do some of these multimedia things that are going to serve our community. And it's really challenging for them because the scale is so small. But it's really challenging for us too. And in fact, we don't have it. Nobody really has it all figured out. And the trick is figuring out which multimedia to do. So a lot of newspapers are pouring out just loads of video and nobody's even watching it. And the key is to figure out this is one where there's something to show in video. We can't be television. And, if you want to watch TV, just watch TV. But there are some things that we can do to add on. Okay.
Just to build on his question, so are you asking reporters who do fact gathering to a certain extent, fact checking and some analysis to also be graphics people, electronic people, video people, all within a 40-hour work week?
We're not so much, but we are giving them all the tools. So, the beauty is, you used to have a camera and this and that. In one phone, you can do a lot of that stuff. And there are occasions where we'll ask a reporter, hey, would you, capture this? If you're going to cover a press conference, capture on video too, and we'll take a little snippet out of it. But no, we're not expecting everybody to do or to be good at everything. We realize we need to develop specialists in all these fields. That said, man, the job of being a journalist is a whole lot more demanding and complicated than it used to be for all of us, for reporters, for photographers who are videographers now, and for editors who need to be understanding all of this stuff. And my response to people is, hey, it beats being bored. Yeah.
Along the same lines, it seems to me with all the versatility that's required, you would need more reporters, and yet a lot of papers are dramatically shrinking in the size of the newsroom.
Yeah, and that's just a matter purely of economics. The revenues have shrunk so much. We've had to shrink our newsroom, but what we're trying to do is I'm trying to increase the number of news gatherers and try to make much more efficient the process of production. And we're hoping that the technology can help us with that. So maybe two more. Two more? Good. All right, thank you.